Most people who know me well enough know that I'm a huge fan of PlayStation, and when it comes to the PlayStation 2, no era of gaming is superior, in my opinion. Back in the days of PS2, there was no bullshit. Gaming was different back then. You could just put that there game into that there disc tray and have yourself a gay old time. Retrospectively, I've always had a soft spot for the PS2. Most games from that era hold up very well today, and what made the PS2 so great for me was back then, a game was a game, not a cash grab. Games were able to present you with a story and interaction. They made you feel like you were the player, like you were in control. There was never a moment of breakaway from the game. What I'm saying is games were games, not movies. You always had your hands on the controller and you were always doing something. Even if you were just sitting through a cutscene, you'd hold the controller because 9 out of 10 times the cutscene wasn't going to take too long. Unless you're playing Metal Gear Solid, in which case, sorry. So why am I saying all of this? Well, one of my most nostalgic games is a perfect example of what I've just said. Always keeping your hand on the controller, always doing something and making you feel a part of the game. With its action, gore, characters and more, God of War is the right door to pick. Because... what? The first God of War game was designed by David Jaffe? Jafar? Yeah, let's go with Jafar. Jafar drew his inspiration from the 1981 flick Clash of the Titans and was heavily influenced by being a fan of Devil May Cry. He only led the development of the first game and then later stepped down to hand the franchise to this guy, Cory Barlog. The franchise went on to spawn 7 titles across the PlayStation 2, 3, and 4, as well as the PSP and also an iOS game. Yeah, an iOS game. They took this and put it on mobile. I wonder if it's any good. Oh. But hey, who gives a shit, right? Let's jump right into this thing. Let me start off by saying that the franchise doesn't have many flaws. Sure, there are some things wrong with the games, but there's nothing really to stain the franchise. There's one game in particular that I'll be ripping into pretty hard, so be ready for that. But for now, the main trilogy. Starting with God of War, the first game in the franchise, released in 2005. The game centers itself around Kratos, a man betrayed by the gods and haunted by his past. The first game is good, don't get me wrong, but it has some issues. Some design choices they made could have been better, such as tapping R2 to open doors. It feels really uncomfortable to do, especially back on the PS2's controller. You try giving it a go, it's a fucking workout. This was later improved, however, in the second game by utilizing the circle button instead of R2. It's a nitpick, but, I mean, it makes sense. Another thing that bothers me is the pacing. For the first 2 hours of the game, you may feel a little disjointed from what's actually happening. Sometimes it just feels like you're going through the motions. Apart from those two things, the game itself is great. Tight controls, fluent combos, multiple enemies, the basic hack and slash formula we're all used to. Moving on from it came the sequel, and this is where everything was improved. Now, have any of you heard of the Borderlands complex? Well, of course you haven't, because I made it up.
So what is the Borderlands complex, Davis?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, viewer. See, when the first Borderlands game was released, it was meant to be a kind of a test by Gearbox. A dip in the water before a dive. Everyone knows that Borderlands 2 is a far superior game than the first one, right? Well, the same thing has pretty much happened here in God of War. It wasn't an intentional design choice, but it definitely shows. After Jafar stepped down, Cory Barlog took over and made the game just 100 times better, making genius design choices, introducing new mechanics, and utilizing every portion of the PS2's power. Basically, Barlog just fucking nailed it. The second game is my most nostalgic of the franchise. It's also the one that I respect the most. God of War 2 was the first one in the franchise that I played, so I didn't know anything about the story, who Kratos was, or even what to expect. So I won't lie, I was shitting it pretty hard when I quickly figured out that I had to fight this fucker. And coming into that first section of the game left an impression on me that I will never forget. I was young, and by this time in my gaming life, this was probably the best game I'd ever played. I mean, of course I've played better games since, obviously. But nothing made me think, holy shit, like God of War 2's opening boss fight. I'm giving the opening scene too much credit, but I was a kid at the time when I first played it, so it's more of an intense nostalgic feeling of fear. Of course, there are far better games today that I've played that are far more superior than God of War 2, such as Bloodborne, for example. The start of Bloodborne is genius in the way that it teaches you how to play the game. It just drops you in without holding your hand and lets you figure it out the hard way, by making mistakes and dying. The game teaches you by making you teach yourself. I forgot what I was talking about. Right, yeah, the opening game thingy, the Colossus whatever. What I guess I'm trying to say is, I just remember the feeling I had playing it as a kid, and what it was like back then. At the time, it was probably the best game I had played, like I said, and I just have a wild rush of nostalgia every time I go back and play the game. Playing the first game after the second kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, especially considering the Colossus against the Hydra. The Hydra was a good battle, don't get me wrong, but the Colossus was just far better. Far better. Especially considering you don't have to deal with this shit when you take on the Colossus. I guess it just refers back to the Borderlands complex, in that the second game was just far more better, and you'd be surprised how often this happens in games. The first game is like a couple's first child. They've never done this before, they've never had the responsibility of raising this child the best that they can. But with the second child, in this case, the sequel, they can better themselves and improve on their mistakes, making better decisions and becoming better parents. This is a weird analogy. I gotta point this out though. There's a big difference in difficulty from the first and second game. Not just in combat, but in the puzzles as well. In the first game, there were a couple of puzzles I was stuck on forever, such as the Desert of Lost Souls and finding Hera and Aphrodite's necklaces. But in the second game, the puzzles almost seemed, well, seamless. The game had this weird way of showing you what to do first in order to start the puzzle, when you could have just figured it out from walking around the room and finding it yourself. You know, like a puzzle. It made the puzzle seem kind of elementary at best. Like there wasn't much effort put into them, it certainly wasn't hard to notice. All in all, the first and second game are both great, very similar yet somehow different. Both have fluent combat, plenty of puzzles, and loads of delightful gore. Which brings me to my next point, one of the most entertaining things about the game, how could I forget? The beautiful, brutal, bone-busting, blood-boiling gore. I mean, it's Greek mythology, so of course there's going to be bloodshed. And God of War is no exception, this is where the gore shines. No, literally, it shines. The game is nothing without its gore, otherwise Kratos' threats would just be idle. The gore plays a massive part because, I mean, well, have you ever read Greek mythology? With all these things put together comes the third game, God of War 3, the pinnacle. This game is a goddamn masterpiece. It takes everything that made the previous games great and merges them together. The action, the puzzles, the gore, the combat, and those graphics! See, this is a sequel. This is a fucking sequel. I remember when I got this game for my 13th birthday, along with my first PS3, and I played the ever-loving shit out of it for hours on end. Every day I'd come home from school and just jump straight on it. Ain't got no time for homework. I got gods to slay. I mean, honestly, what can I say about this game without sucking its dick? It's just a fantastic game that concluded a badass trilogy. Seriously, this is like my favorite game. God of War 3 was the pinnacle for me. There is not one thing about the game that I didn't like. They improved on things that flawed the previous titles and shaped the trilogy in a completely new way. Some might say I'm being biased, but I mean, the game's good for a reason. It deserves the praise. Plus, it's my show, fuck off. Unfortunately, now comes the bad. God of War Ascension. Before I start, I just want to say that this game's combat is probably my favourite out of all of the games in the franchise. Instead of having multiple weapons to choose from like in God of War 3, your blades of whatever the fuck were infused with different elements like fire, water, and lightning. Having this function allowed players to effectively change weapons on the fly. You could go from heavy water attacks to quick and fast lightning attacks. But the game itself, I found, was very lackluster. It didn't have a strong story, it didn't finish well, and the game was only 5 fucking hours. And don't give me that crap of, oh, it was a multiplayer-focused game. Fuck you. When the game was announced along with the multiplayer, I remember being really damn hyped for it. I remember thinking it was such a great idea. Until I played the multiplayer and realised it was a piece of shit. There were balancing issues, people only played one mode, the matchmaking took forever, and the repetition was just too prominent. This piled on with how the game didn't even try to keep you interested was an insult. I can't even recall any DLC, new maps, or any new modes that came out for the game. It was just a few cosmetic items here, a few new weapons there. Nothing more was added to keep the consumer wanting more. Once you're done with the story, you'd play the multiplayer for 5 minutes, get your ass handed to you, and then never pick it up again. At least that's what happened to me. Look, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on this game. I just had a bad time with Ascension. Of course, many people are going to have different experiences with the game than what I had, especially with the multiplayer. But I mean, whatever. Now only comes the PSP games, Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta. These games are in the ugly column because, I mean, just look at them, they're ugly as sin. These games are great, and they stay very true to the God of War feel. Puzzles, combat, and story. Dialogue needs work, though.
What treachery is this? Olympus has sent a message, and I am here to deliver it. I won't take your riches, but I will take your life.
I have met some people that didn't enjoy these games, and I just can't figure out why. They're both fun, they both provide great challenges, and they both offer something more than just the same old Kratos is angry, Kratos wants blood, Kratos smash kind of thing. Hell, there's even more things to offer in these short games than there is in fucking Ascension over there. Now, something I do need to point out about Chains of Olympus in regards to gameplay is the first magic power you acquire, the Ifrit. It's so damn OP, it's broken. You can speedrun the game with this shit.
Pesky ne'er-do-wells getting all up in your business? Army of Darkness trying to rain on your parade? Sounds like you need the Ifrit. Just hold down these two buttons here and have yourself a real humdinger of a time by tapping the circle button. Hold the power of Mount Vesuvius right in your pocket, and just like Pompeii, watch your troubles just burn away!
The Ifrit is not to be used by children. All injuries and or fatalities caused by the Ifrit are of no fault of our own. Playing with fire may cause death.
But you can overlook it. I guess it's not entirely overpowered considering you can only use it while you have mana, but I digress. The ending boss fight for Chains of Olympus was a really good ending to a game. It was almost like something out of Zelda. You had to use the majority of the items that you gathered previously to beat the game, not just swing your swords wildly and hope for the best. But the ending after the boss fight was really neat. It basically leaves you where God of War 1 picks up. This part.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. Now there is no hope.
Essentially, Chains of Olympus is the prequel to God of War 1. I won't say I'll spoil anything on plot, but I do recommend playing all the games in order, just because it's such an epic tale. Which now brings me lastly to Ghost of Sparta. Man, what can I say about this game? Firstly, the story is a nice touch. You get to learn who Kratos was as a child and what he's had to do and live through before he, well, fucked his own life sideways. Secondly, the gameplay. Now, Ghost of Sparta was released 2nd of November 2010, and God of War 3 was released the 16th of March of the same year. And after playing God of War 3, it was obvious to see that the developers learned what made God of War 3 excellent, and carried all of that knowledge over to Ghost of Sparta. It's just nice to see when game devs grow and improve a game that they've already been working on for years. Honestly, the only reason that Ghost of Sparta is in the ugly column is because I feel like it was just short of being something spectacular. It was a great game, certainly the better of the two PSP titles, but I felt like it needed just a bit more, like it was only 90% finished. They could have innovated new things in new ways. I mean, after all, this was the game that came out after their best game, so they could have made it better. Does that make sense? I don't know. All in all, God of War is a fantastic franchise with so much to offer. It may look like just a clone of Devil May Cry, which is sort of partly true, but there is so much more below the surface. The game has a wide variety of gameplay mechanics, and in my opinion, everyone should give it a go. Even if you don't like the story, I guarantee you'll like the gameplay. Unless you're a prude and don't like violence. God of War will always be my favourite franchise, and I'll always hold it to my heart. And with the new game coming out, I couldn't be more excited. It makes me all giddy. On that note, I'm all wrapped up. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, and you can check out some other stuff I've made. Or don't, it's really up to you.